From the Weston A. Price Foundation, welcome to the Wise Traditions podcast for wise traditions in food, farming, and the healing arts. We are your source for scientific knowledge and traditional wisdom to help you achieve optimal health. And now here is our host and producer, Hilda Labrada Gore.
Hey, Hilda here. Bloating, GERDs, Crohn's, irritable bowel syndrome, acne, allergies, anxiety, and more. All of these issues are related to gut health. This is episode 471, and our guest today is Dr. Loredana Shapson. Loredana is the founder of LifeMod Solutions, a holistic health practice. Today, Loredana explains why so many of us have gut issues, and she offers straightforward tips that she uses in her practice to facilitate healing for her patients. She tells us which medications to avoid, for example, because of the havoc they create in the gut. She also describes the critical role of diet in healing, and she shares her personal favorite gut-healthy foods. She tells us what to look out for as signs of gut distress, ranging from symptoms like diarrhea, anxiety, fatigue, and even depression. She also identifies root causes of those symptoms, ranging from pesticides in our food supply to chlorine in our tap water. Finally, Loredana offers simple first steps toward healing, and she reminds us that our immune system, hormones, metabolic health, and brain health all improve when we address our gut issues. Before we get into the conversation, I want to remind you that the Weston A. Price Foundation is a member-supported group. In other words, we can only do education, research, and activism with your help. There's no other way. So please become a Weston A. Price Foundation member if you're not yet. Go to westonaprice.org and click on the Join Now button and use the code POD10 to join for $30 a year, only $30 a year. I can hardly believe it. It's so affordable and it means so much. Thank you in advance for your support and welcome to the family. This is Hilda Labrada Gore and you're listening to Wise Traditions. Welcome to Wise Traditions, Loredana.
Thank you for having me. I'm excited to be here.
I can't believe in 8 years of podcasting that we haven't really touched on this topic much, the topic of gut health and bloating in particular.
Yes.
Let's start with the story of the woman that walked into your office who felt like every evening she was bloating so much, it felt like she was pregnant.
Yes. Oh, so I had a 40-something in my office who had unexplained bloating. And like she said, at the end of the day, her belly would distend as if she looked like she would be pregnant. Her belly would rumble and grumble after every meal. She had a lot of gas, so coming out burping and also the other end. And it was unexplainable. It was just every day, all day. And she couldn't figure out why it happened. And so we started to work together. And within about a couple of weeks, all her bloating symptoms went away, her digestion balanced, and we used food and some lifestyle changes and supplements to help her feel better. And so what I want to share with people who are listening is if you have stomach issues, the stomach heals itself so quickly. In fact, the relining replaces itself every 3 to 5 days. So you can see tremendous changes very quickly when you start getting rid of the bad stuff, getting rid of the toxins, and bringing in the good nutrition and replacement products to heal.
That is such good news. I didn't know that about the lining replacing itself every 3 to 5 days.
Yeah, it's really impressive and really fast. And so I find that patients who come into my office, they have had a colonoscopy. They've had an endoscopy. They have had blood work. Everything comes back normal, but they're still having these issues and they feel stuck and they feel trapped as if this is something that cannot be healed. And so I'm happy to report that anybody can heal at any age if you put a little effort into it with good food.
I wonder why their blood work comes back, quote, normal, unquote.
Well, so here's the good thing. There's limitations with these tests. I think one of the biggest things of bloating is that there is bacteria present in the wrong part of the colon. And so when we talk about the colon, we have the small intestine and the large intestine. So when you do a colonoscopy, you're only getting as far as the middle of the large intestine. There's no way you're accessing the small intestine. And then when you do an endoscopy, which goes down the throat and into the stomach, you're only getting as far as the stomach. So you're missing part of the bowels. And for a lot of people, what's happening is there's an overgrowth of bacteria in the small intestines that goes undetected through these tests. And so that's why everything typically comes back normal. But instead, they end up presenting with gut symptoms and the bloating that we talked about and the belching and the gas. And some people even have abdominal pain and cramping and nausea and vomiting and things like that.
And just because something is common doesn't mean it's normal or right.
Yeah.
In other words, what you're describing to me sounds awfully common. I've heard of a lot of people complaining of bloating and gas, digestive discomfort. It's more and more common, wouldn't you say?
Oh, 100%. And I would even say I hear it very often in children with their stomach aches and their belly aches. And it's just becoming so perverse in our society that, and this is what I saw in my practice too. I've been doing my holistic healing practice for 6 years now. I'm traditionally trained as a pharmacist and I did pharmacy for 12 years and I've left that career because it was not satisfying. And what I have found in my 6 years of this holistic work is every single person that came into my office had something going on with their stomach. And I started to find this pattern. And so that's when I specifically began to hyper focus on gut health these past 3 to 4 years, because I've realized that when I fix the gut, I fixed a lot of other issues. So it is common and everybody suffers from it, whether it's mild symptoms or major symptoms, it is everywhere.
Yeah, I was talking with a little girl who was about 5 years old not too long ago. And I forget what I was saying to her. And we were eating and she said, yeah, I have a stomach ache. And I said, oh, well, I'm sure it'll get better. And she said, it's unstoppable. And I was shocked. So it doesn't surprise me on some level, though, that you're saying this is seen across the board with all ages.
Yeah. And it just breaks my heart because you could just hear that hopelessness in her response there as a child.
Yes, at age 5. Oh, my goodness.
If you think about what those kids are eating, right, it's a lot of processed foods.
Yeah.
It's very low in vegetables, low in water. There's a lot of chemicals in those foods. And so that is not what our gut needs to thrive and flourish. And so changing their diet to more whole foods with probiotics is really the fix. And I found that kids rebound even quicker than adults do.
What are some other symptoms of gut issues besides bloating? Like how could we have almost a little alarm letting us know something's up with our digestion to make us aware of the fact that we need to make some changes?
Yeah, it's a great question. So obviously we think of the most obvious symptoms, which would be your stomach stuff, right? The bloating, we could have acid reflux or GERD. There could also be nausea and vomiting, abdominal cramping, and then also episodes of constipation where you're only going to the bathroom maybe once or twice a week, maybe 3 times a week. And then also diarrhea where you're having a lot of loose stools. So those are the most obvious. But then there's also some not so obvious symptoms, which you may not connect to your gut health, but things like immune system issues. So people who have a lot of frequent colds over the winter, or they get sick frequently, they have asthma, some breathing issues, or maybe they have rashes and hives. And then also autoimmune conditions have been really tied back to gut health as well. So people with autoimmune conditions, and then there's things like fatigue and just general anxiety as well, and mood disorders, and depression is also being seen amongst patients who have gut issues too. So those are probably the most common, but it is a pervasive, every organ is affected at some level.
Yeah. So let's talk now about what we can do to address this. You talked about changing our diet. What are some of the first dietary shifts that you recommend?
Yeah, I mean, number one is we need to go back to eating whole foods and eliminating processed foods for the exact reason that we have a lot of chemicals in our foods, or they're low in fiber, like mentioned, and they also contain things like preservatives. And so preservatives are another word for an antibiotic. And we didn't really touch on antibiotics, but that is a huge, huge driver for gut imbalances in the body, because antibiotics not only kill the good guys, they kill the bad guys. They kill everybody. And the only guys who survive are the more virulent and the more angry ones. And so we have to understand, okay, we get antibiotics from our doctors, right? A lot of people, this culture has since improved, which I'm happy to see, that when you go to the doctor, they don't just throw you an antibiotic right away. This has since calmed down. But there was a long history where antibiotics were given out like candy for everybody. And then in addition, we know that most of our antibiotic use actually happens in livestock raising and agriculture. So when you are eating non-organic meats or not grass-fed meats, you're being exposed to small doses of antibiotics in your food supply every single day. And so that is killing our gut bacteria.
And that bears repeating. So the greatest use of antibiotics in the world is with the animals. There's more used in agricultural circles than in, I guess, human pharmaceutical circles. Is that right?
Absolutely. 70% of our antibiotic supply goes to the animals. Yep. Because they live in such close corridors and they try to prevent infection of the animals. Yep.
And so when we eat them, we get some doses of that, and that can throw off our gut health.
Absolutely. Yep. I consider antibiotic like an atomic bomb. It is one dose is enough to decimate the good guys and the bad guys, and this creates the imbalance. When you also take antibiotics, you actually reduce the bacterial population. And what ends up happening is you increase the population of, say, yeast and candida. That is another cause of bloating, is having an overgrowth of yeast and candida in the GI tract. And so that can cause other pervasive gut issues and a slew of other health issues we're not going to get into today, but maybe another time.
Oh my gosh. But I think it's important to focus on the bad news so then we can get the good news. So let's review the things that kind of wreck our gut health, from antibiotics, preservatives in the food, which you said are a kind of antibiotics if we really look at it that way. What else is kind of messing with our digestive system?
Yeah, great question. So similar to antibiotics and preservatives are things like pesticides, right? Glyphosate. All of those are just another word for an antibiotic. It kills the bugs that live within us. And the next is even chlorine in tap water, right? It was such a necessary health addition for our survival. However, that's exactly why it was added, was to kill microbes in the water supply. And now when we're drinking that tap water, that chlorine is also affecting our gut balance. Then we have things like our diet, which is high in sugar. Unfortunately, sugar is pervasive. And so our gut bacteria eat what we eat. So if we are constantly feeding them sugar, they're going to ferment that sugar in our GI tract, and that's going to release gas. That's the same concept of like when you crack open a beer and you hear the hiss or you hear the champagne pop. It is that fermentation of sugar that creates a gas buildup. So the more sugar and refined carbs that we eat, the more fermentation we have.
This is the first time anyone's explained it to me with that illustration. That is mind-blowing. In other words, it's not just, let's say, improperly prepared beans that could cause a lot of gas and bloating, but you're saying sugar can actually lead to that discomfort and these issues.
Yeah, absolutely. So this will be one thing as a solution, is to reduce your sugar intake, and even like fruit. Fructose can be hard to absorb for a lot of people. So we remove fruit from a lot of people's diets in the beginning, and it's just temporary anytime we're going through gut healing phases, but fruit can be a problem as well. So back to like some other causes, right? So food supply, we have things like constipation. So when we're not emptying our bowels, we are holding on to toxic material. It sits in the colon and it actually irritates the lining of our GI tract and causes inflammation. And that reduces our ability to absorb food and absorb nutrients. Everything is slow and stagnant. So now things are fermenting and growing in this space that probably should not be there. It creates a breeding ground for unwanted microbes. So going to the bathroom every day is extremely important in this picture as well. And then another thing to comment on too is stress, like even just like emotional stress. When our body feels like it's running away from a tiger, even though we're really not, it is not thinking about our digestive system. So I always say when stress is on, your digestive system turns off. And that means you're not releasing your digestive enzymes and juices. And therefore you are going to have trouble breaking down your food. And thus that's when the bacteria get to it first and they're going to start having their fun.
Wow, there's so many facets to this. I'm really fascinated. And when you were mentioning constipation, I couldn't help but think of the elderly population that sometimes struggles with regularity. And they think, maybe they just think it's part and parcel what happens when you get older. Like you just start to have these digestive issues, but not necessarily. Maybe they've upped their sugar consumption. Maybe they're stressed. Maybe they're not moving as much. And all this causes, as you say, the digestive system to kind of shut down and function improperly.
Exactly. Yep. And then like lack of movement and water intake is a huge part of constipation as well. And then as you get older, we probably go to quick foods because we don't want to cook. We don't want to do all those things anymore. And so now we're eating more processed foods and quick foods that are low quality.
Coming up, Loredana offers practical tips for addressing gut issues, including 2 quick tips that can be applied today for immediate relief.
You're listening to the Wise Traditions podcast from the Weston A. Price Foundation. We pause now to recognize our sponsors.
Maui Nui. Maui Nui Venison is a mission-based food company bringing the healthiest red meat on the planet directly to your door. You'll love their meat and their mission. First off, their meat is top quality venison, seriously delicious and easy to cook. The whole family can enjoy it. And don't let the word venison throw you. This meat is so clean and tender, you will love it. Ethically, you can feel great about Maui Nui venison. This is the only stress-free, 100% wild harvested red meat on the market. Maui Nui is a one-of-a-kind operation over a decade in the making that is actively helping restore balance to vulnerable ecosystems and communities in Hawaii. You have to try their all-natural venison jerky sticks for an optimal 10 grams of protein and just 55 calories. I can vouch for how good these are. So visit mauinuivenison.com/wise to take advantage of this limited time offer and get 20% off your first order, including your first subscription. Make sure to get on the notification list so you are ready when memberships are released. Again, that's mauinuivenison.com/wise for 20% off your first order of fresh venison, jerky, broth, and ohana subscription. Enjoy. And Pluck seasoning. You've heard me talk about the importance of eating organ meats. Hands down, they are the most nutritious foods on the planet that support nearly every system in the body. There is an easy and delicious way now to microdose organ meats daily, and it's with Pluck seasoning. Pluck is a mix of 5 100% grass-fed, freeze-dried powdered organs, liver, heart, kidney, spleen, and pancreas, and organic spices and herbs. It's as easy as seasoning your food, and it tastes exceptionally good on everything. It's so versatile. Pluck is great on vegetables, meat, fish, eggs, bone broth, popcorn. Yes, popcorn. Salad dressing, and so much more. You can add it while you're cooking or once you're done, and you just want to add a little something. Pluck even has a zesty garlic blend that has no nightshades or seeds. And if you just want the organ meat nutrition without the salt, spices, and herbs, there's Pluck Pure, which is a 100% organ meat blend. It can be added to your smoothies, your coffee, or anything else with flavor. For a limited time, you, the Wise Traditions listener, can get 20% off your Pluck order by heading to eatpluck.com/wise. The Wise gives you 20% off, a code that is automatically applied at checkout. So go over to eatpluck.com/wise and get your order of Pluck today. This is Hilda Labrada Gore, and you're listening to Wise Traditions.
Now, while it seems scary, we just went over all these terrible things that I hope our listeners are like, oh no. But here's the beauty. Once we understand what's causing it, now we can go to solutions. Now we can figure out where we can fix things. And so that's where we can come in with some good healing items. So back to your original question, which was, what can we do to fix our gut health? We go back to whole foods. We need to get rid of the chemicals, get rid of the processed foods, grass-fed, organic. This is all the Wise Traditions ways, right?
That's right.
And I think one of the biggest things that we really need to focus on is probiotics, right? So probiotics from our foods are extremely important. And we talk about things like yogurt and kefir, people pronounce it differently, but things like sauerkraut and kimchi and beet kvass, those are all the things that we heavily promote at Wise Traditions. I follow a lot of the Weston A. Price guidelines with my patients. And so eating these foods every single day is extremely important to start bringing in the good bacteria. Let's start bringing in our police force. They'll regulate things and start rebalancing the gut.
This is so interesting. I think I used to consider gut health as a situation with you got the bad bacteria and you got the good bacteria, and you're trying to bring in, like you said, more reinforcements for the good bacteria so they outnumber the bad. But some people have told me, and tell me what you think of this, Loredana, that the bad aren't necessarily bad. There's just supposed to be a balance between these different kind in the gut. And if either side gets too big, it becomes imbalanced. Is that true? What do you think of that?
I do agree with that statement 100%. All of these microbes are supposed to live within us, and that includes the good bacteria. And we label it good and bad just because it's easy to help people distinguish the differences, but you're correct. For example, people are afraid of, say, C. diff, right? It's the Clostridium difficile bacteria, which can cause severe diarrhea, dehydration, and even death in some people. And that is a dangerous thing when it overgrows. But all of us have C. diff within us. It's just kept in balance and in check. It's when you start taking antibiotics that now C. diff overgrows, and then there's too many of them, and they're the ones that start to cause the problem. So you are correct. It's just an imbalance, and we just got to keep everybody in check.
Absolutely. Okay. So eating more whole, real foods, less processed foods, lowering our sugar intake. What other recommendations do you offer your patients?
Yeah, drinking a lot of water in between meals at room temperature so that we can make sure that you're pooping every day. Eating more fiber, so eating a lot of vegetables. And I would say for a lot of people too, when they have gut issues, I often find that my patients will say, man, every time I eat broccoli, my belly's upset. Or every time I eat cabbage, they'll list a specific vegetable and a food. And it's almost like a catch-22. The very food that I need to be eating right now is the food that's causing me more symptoms. So what do I do? And this becomes an issue. But what we need to do in the beginning of our gut healing journey, if you're somebody who's suffering right now, and this sounds like you, is you need to eat more cooked vegetables. They need to be soups and stews, and specifically broths, because the animal broths have a lot of collagen and proteins that are really easy to digest. They have a lot of minerals and basic nutrients that we need to rebuild the lining of our gut to strengthen that tissue. And then when you cook your foods and you cook your vegetables, now they're easier to digest. It's the low and slow cooking that is the best thing that you can do. So in the beginning, I will have all my patients eat soups and stews for maybe 2 to 3 weeks. And that is going to settle the stomach. It's going to calm things down. And then as you're doing that, we start to bring in probiotic foods. So maybe you start with a little bit of sauerkraut. I always like to start with the vegetables first, because for some people, dairy can bother people's belly. And so we need to start with vegetables first. So start with the sauerkraut, and if the kimchi, if you're okay with spicy stuff, or maybe some beet kvass or any other vegetables that you want to ferment at home, start there and start small and see how you do. And as you're eating the healthy foods, the cooked foods, and now you're bringing in the slow probiotics, one thing we didn't talk about yet is that one of the things that probiotics do for us is they help us digest our food. They release enzymes and minerals and nutrients, and they help regulate our hormones. And so even when we're struggling to break down foods, our probiotics, the good bacteria, are there to support our digestive system. So now we're starting to correct the underlying problem. Great. We're bringing in some probiotic foods. Now you can start bringing in some of those vegetables. And when you bring in some of those vegetables, you got to think of it like training your gut like you go to the gym. You're not going to eat a whole head of broccoli in your one meal just because you're excited that you started it. You're going to start with maybe 1 or 2 bites. And I know that sounds very small, but we have to train the gut. 1 or 2 bites today, see how you do. You did great, perfect. The next time you eat it in the day or two, you're going to have another extra bite or 2. Now you're at 3 to 4 bites, and you just slowly start to work your gut and prepare the bacteria to start working that out. In a matter of weeks, you'll be able to eat almost everything that you weren't able to eat before.
I can see that this is very wise traditions based, because some of our principles are, for example, every indigenous culture ate some of their animal products raw and cooked a lot of their plant foods, right? So they were breaking down some of the anti-nutrients by doing so. They also fermented. They all had lacto-fermented foods in their diet. And they made use of the whole animal with broth. So you're calling people back, Loredana, to eating more the wise traditions way, which is beautiful.
Yeah, it's 100% everything that everyone needs to go back to. And so I was so excited to come on this podcast because I'm like, this is it. This is the people. You all just have to, I know life gets carried away, and we have our conveniences and we have our parties and our events. But we need to go back to listening to our body. And if something bothers our body, we need to come back to wise traditions, clean house for a couple of weeks, and then reset our body so that we can heal again. So it's exciting.
And returning to the digestion piece, the way one person described it to me was that we only have one stomach, as opposed to cattle, for example, or other ruminants that have various chambers, some of which help them convert, let's say, the grass to kind of ferment it or neutralize anti-nutrients and make the nutrients therein more bioavailable. We don't. So probiotic rich or fermented foods, the kind of pre-digestion that our single stomach bodies require.
Exactly. And I'm really glad you're bringing this up, this whole process of lactofermentation, sprouting, that whole process of making food more digestible. And so I will say that a lot of my patients too, there's a reason why we have to take these steps to prepare these foods in a particular way. And it's because it is so irritating to our gut lining. So when we first are trying to heal our gut, I actually do remove from people's diets, grains, even sprouted grains and soaked and sourdough'd, all of that. I still remove it for a little bit. We remove nuts and seeds for a little bit. And we also remove beans because they are hard to digest for some people. And every recommendation is temporary. So it's only for a couple of weeks. Let's let everything heal. And then you can start bringing these pre-digested foods back in and see how you tolerate them. And then you'll know, wow, you know what? I just had some beans and like that really didn't settle with my stomach. So I need to avoid that for a little bit longer. And again, minding the principle that less is better at the start. So if you're going to be reintroducing beans, you're only going to have a teaspoon or two, maybe a tablespoon. And I know that sounds like a little bit, but that's where we have to start, is be kind, gentle, and slow. And your gut will thank you.
And you're inviting people to pay attention to how their body's responding. Already they know their body's kind of yelling at them, something's wrong. So they're coming in. But apart from that pain, they may not notice maybe the constant aggravation that their digestive system is dealing with until you have them slow down, eliminate a few things, and start over.
Yeah. And it's interesting. And where you just live in a culture where we have learned to ignore our own body cues and our symptoms, and we mask it with over-the-counter medications and not truly handling it. So please, I encourage everybody to feel back into your body, take a moment and really think about what's happening. And, you know, talking about masking, there's one thing I really want to bring up, which is very important because I'm a pharmacist, and one of my least favorite medications, and one that I find doesn't have much use in our human health, is acid reducing medications. And these are things that you can find over the counter, like Zantac, omeprazole, Prilosec. These are also known as proton pump inhibitors, but all of them, the Tums, all of them reduce stomach acid. They're marketed for GERD. And so what we're finding is that when we do that, we're reducing our ability to break down food. Acid in our stomach is actually an extremely important part of our digestive system. It is our protection from the outside environment. If you think about all the things that come through our mouth and all the things we're touching, our stomach acid is responsible for killing all of the things that shouldn't make it any further down the line. So when you reduce your stomach acid, now you're allowing for the growth of unwanted microbes and creating an imbalance from what's coming in and what's also already in your gut.
This is such an important point because I've heard of infants that have been put on Tums because they were having too much acid reflux. But tell me if this is right, Loredana. Some people say it's not that they have too much stomach acid. It's something else that's off, that reducing that stomach acid is a really bad idea.
Yeah, it's a really bad idea. It is the first medicine I get all of my patients off of when we start to work together. And for that child who's having that issue, you have to look at what you're feeding that child. It's mostly formula-fed babies that generally have that problem. And if it is happening to breastfeeding mothers, what's mom eating? Because what mom eats affects the baby as well. So that's an easy tweak of trial and error of removing some foods to support the baby. But generally, I find that when people don't tolerate foods, or when people have like sensitivities or issues with food, it's generally because their gut is imbalanced. And maybe that child would do much better with a probiotic supplement. And there's plenty of supplements available in liquid form for infants and children because they can't eat the foods that we can eat yet, right? So this is where supplements come into our lifestyle, right? When you cannot have it in the diet. And so for children, that would be an appropriate addition for them to start bringing in some probiotic supplements for the baby.
Right. Yeah. I mean, this was an infant. They weren't capable of eating anything. They were definitely just either having formula or breast milk. And I think you're right. Let's not just address the symptom. Let's look for what the root is.
Exactly.
And I've heard it said too that people always say, you are what you eat, you are what you eat. Someone said, well, actually, you are what you absorb. Because I imagine a lot of this gut dysbiosis or these gut issues we're having affect how much of the good stuff our bodies can take in too and benefit from.
Yeah, absolutely. When we talk about our digestive system, we need to realize that every single cell in your body relies on your digestive system to break down and absorb the nutrients it needs to function. And so for some people, when their gut is compromised, they start presenting with different issues. For some people, it presents maybe as an autoimmune condition. For some people, it presents as a joint problem. For others, it's a headache. And so your family history will kind of cue you into which bucket you may fall into, but every single body part and system is affected by your gut health. And so to touch on this even more is I think that when we look at the data that's coming out now in clinical research that's studying gut health in certain conditions, we see gut health supporting all over. And I'm going to just run through a quick list of what the research is showing. So they have studied probiotics and probiotic foods in people with IBS, which is what we've been discussing, right? Those gut symptoms, things like mood, depression, and anxiety. We see improvements in people's moods. We see things like respiratory infections get better in children, UTI infections improve with women when they start using probiotics and eating cleaner, improving their gut health. We see hormones get better. So women with PCOS and even some bone density scans get better. We also see people with allergies. So for example, someone who cannot tolerate dairy, all of a sudden, after they fix their diet and bring in some probiotic foods and supplements, now they can tolerate dairy again. And that's what I discussed earlier, because the dairy, the bacteria can release enzymes that break down dairy for us. We don't have to do the work. And then there's other things we see too, which is really exciting, is things like metabolic health. So when we talk about blood work, our blood sugars get better, insulin resistance gets better, cholesterol numbers improve. We see weight loss after several months, gut health rebalancing. So you can see here that I just listed a wide range of conditions. We touched on the immune system, hormones, metabolic health, and gut health, and all of these things, including brain health. All of these things are improving when we fix our gut. So I think everybody should be focusing on this first when they're trying to correct their health, and then start tackling issues more specifically.
Wow. I'm so glad you gave that overview. And I was thinking, you probably mentioned this too, but even you said allergies, but acne, right, could have something to do with your body responding to some imbalance in the gut.
Absolutely. 100%. I say this to all my skin patients. I have a lot of patients who come to me with psoriasis and rosacea and acne, rashes and hives. Your skin is actually made up of the same tissue as your GI tract. So your skin is a representation of going on what's inside your gut. And the same thing with your mouth. People forget that our mouth is a part of our GI tract, but what's happening in your mouth is happening in your gut. And so very tied together that if we just correct our gut, and I see this very frequently, we need to correct our skin. And usually with skin conditions, what I see is typically these are patients who have had a lot of antibiotics in their history and in their lifespan and have not taken probiotics. They don't eat probiotic foods. And so we see that they have an overgrowth of yeast and candida. And once we start bringing in the good bacteria and we bring down the yeast and candida population, I see that all those skin conditions get better.
That's so encouraging. Now let's back up, Loredana. I want to ask why you left the pharmaceutical field to come into this gut health kind of more holistic space.
Yeah. So I got two little paths for that. So one is I've been in the industry. I was in it for 12 years and I just saw some just disturbing, unhealthy patterns. And I'm going to use the word disgusting because it was like people would come in with one prescription, then next thing you know, they'd be on another, the next thing on another, and it would just get added and added and added on to where the average person was on 5 to 7 products. And it was a side effect would come up and they'd treat again. The other alarming thing that I saw was that the conditions when I first got into the field, like high blood pressure and diabetes, I would see that in older populations. And now I was starting to see it in 20-year-olds taking insulin and on 3 blood pressure medications. And then children also on a lot of prescriptions. And it just started to become like, wow, I did not get into this industry to just shell out pills and mask the problem. It just keeps getting worse. We're not getting to the root cause. So that was my first driver, was something's not right here. And I started to question it the minute that I was in pharmacy school. I was kind of like that outlier bad girl that was going against the grain in school, but I'm not poo-pooing what I learned. I think that everything that I learned in pharmacy school was what made me who I am today. And I'm very grateful for that experience. And then the next part of this journey is my own personal health conditions were not resolved with the medical community. I too suffered from bloating where I looked like I was pregnant. I would drink a glass of water in the morning and it would be unexplainable and I would be embarrassed and I would start to develop social anxiety. Can I go out to dinner with friends and eat something, or am I going to bloat like I'm pregnant? So I had my own personal issues with that. I suffered with constipation for most of my life. And I tied it back to when it mostly started was when I was in college in that teenage year, I had acne. And my doctor put me on antibiotics. That was like the gold standard of care. And I was on it for about 4 months. I can't remember. It was so long now, but 3 to 4 months, every single day, I took an antibiotic. And that was when I really started to see my whole entire gut health shift and change. And so once I came into my holistic world, I started to focus on gut health, and I saw it in my patients. And I said, well, with my background, my education, I'm going to read all the clinical research that I can find and really study this. And I feel like I have found the missing piece and figured it out. And so now I'm focusing on gut health in my practice today. And it's been amazing to get people off of medications now.
It sounds so rewarding. And I just want to review to make sure I got it right. Of course, people may want to consult with you or some local health practitioner, but from what you've said, changing our diet is a good idea, avoiding the processed foods with all the preservatives and chemicals and so forth, lowering our sugar intake, upping our probiotic intake could be through fermented foods and so forth, or supplements, and reducing their stress. Is there anything else you would recommend?
Yeah, I mean, some quick tips that people can apply today, right, for immediate relief. Like every morning, if you could start your day off with boil some hot water, pour it over a half of a lemon, and you can even put a little splash of apple cider vinegar in there. We talked about acidity earlier, and that's that lemon and the apple cider vinegar specifically is going to add a little bit of acidity and kind of jumpstart your digestive system. And you could do that all throughout the day and with each meal. And then I'd also recommend for people who are having some current stomach issues and even acid reflux, when you're feeling that discomfort, apple cider vinegar or any vinegar that doesn't have sugar is your friend. And you would take a tablespoon of a vinegar and mix it into about 2 to 3 ounces of water, not a lot of water, and drink that no matter what's happening with your meal, without your meal. If you're nauseous, if your stomach hurts, if you're full, that's just really going to start moving things downward, correcting the gut with that acidity and starting to flow. So those are some immediate things that we can do to help us now while you work on your diet, while you let the probiotics do their magic and get things going from there.
Now, Loredana, what do you say to the skeptic who's like, oh, all these like sensitivities and intolerances and even gut issues are kind of in people's heads. It's like it wasn't around 10, 15 years ago. So this is like a trend. What do you say to those people?
Yeah, I mean, luckily, I don't think I've come across any of them because everybody's got gut problems. But what I will say that people probably don't understand or unaware about is that how much gut health impacts probably their other conditions that they don't realize. And there's people out there that say, well, I don't have stomach issues, I shouldn't take a probiotic. Well, maybe you have some other conditions that are going on. We know that probiotics can, in clinical research, they reduce inflammation and they help the immune system. So whenever you're reducing inflammation, you're going to heal a ton of conditions. And so if you're not sure, I would say try a probiotic for yourself, stay with it. The clinical research shows that peak benefit occurs when you take a probiotic for at least 2 to 3 months. Okay. So I'm mentioning this because some people will take a probiotic, they'll stay on it for a couple of weeks and they go, I didn't really notice a difference. So I stopped it. And then I always say to them, well, you know what? You didn't give it enough time. And so you can't judge it yet. Okay. And so while you still will feel improvements when you first start taking the probiotic, I would say stick with it for 3 months before you really decide, have your other conditions improve. So I will tell people, try it, give it a chance, and be patient.
Yeah, that's a good point. And another thing that comes to my mind is something Sally has said a number of times to me, is that there are more probiotics in a teaspoonful of sauerkraut than in some of the probiotic pills that they're selling over the counter.
It's very true. And so when we think about this, and I want to make this distinction because it's very important. When you buy yogurt or kefir or fermented foods, say in a grocery store, they have found probably the minimum time necessary to get that fermentation right. So the shorter it's fermented, the less probiotics you'll have in it. So for example, yogurt now can ferment for about 4 hours commercially, and you're only going to get about 1 to 3 billion is what probiotics are measured as. They're called CFUs, 1 to 3 billion in yogurt. But when you make your yogurt at home and you let it ferment for 36 hours, which is way longer than what commercial is, you can get over 200 to 250 billion in that same amount of product. So this comes back to wise traditions, making your own food at home, giving it time and patience that it deserves, and you'll get way more benefit.
So Loredana, I'm curious about your own diet. And I know there's bioindividuality. Like we're not all going to just go out and copy you right now. But I imagine you have this water and lemon or water and apple cider vinegar regularly. What else do you make sure to include every day if you can?
Yeah, for sure. I make a soup every single week, whether it's a soup or a stew or a chili. That is a regular part of my diet to make sure that I'm constantly getting that broth in. If I'm not having a soup, then I make sure I just have a cup of warm broth, maybe with my meal, or I'll have it as instead of water, I'll replace it just to get those good nutrients in. And of course, I try to make it myself when I can. I definitely use chickens and I have bones. I make my own bone broth. Thank you, Instant Pot, for cutting that time in half. And so I would say that a staple is absolutely broth, soups, and stews. And then the next thing I do is if I eat beans, my beans are always pressure cooked. I usually make a lentil soup or some kind of lentil dish or chickpea or some kind of bean. But beans are easier to digest when they are fermented or soaked, as we discussed, but then even more importantly, when they're pressure cooked, because it does eliminate one of those chemicals within it. So if I do beans, which is very important for fiber intake for the good bacteria, it's always pressure cooked. And then the next thing I would say is a lot of animals. I eat every single animal. I do bison, I do elk, I do eggs, I do fish eggs, and I do a lot of sauerkrauts as well. So I'm a very much a wise tradition following girl. Yeah.
You are, and a diverse diet. I remember when I interviewed Chris Masterjohn on this subject, he said, our diets today are so limited. You would think they would be more diverse than our ancestors, but they're less. So the fact that you're eating a variety of meats, you're including the broth, you're definitely doing it the Wise Traditions way.
Yeah. I mean, if you think about when you go to the grocery store, it's the same vegetables, it's the same herbs, the same 20 to 25 foods. And when you think about it ancestrally, we had access to over 300 different plants and herbs and things that we had in our diet. So yeah, go back to natural ways, grow your own food, have your own garden, and enjoy the pleasures of diversity.
I love it. Well, now I feel like you might have already answered the question I like to pose at the end, but just in case you didn't, I want to ask you if the listener could just do one thing to improve their health. It could be related to gut health or maybe not. What would you recommend that they do, Loredana?
I would say the apple cider vinegar for gut health. That is the most underestimated, easy to do, convenient thing that everybody has in every household right now. If you have gut symptoms, apple cider vinegar. And if you overeat or you went out to dinner and you had some bad foods and you had some ice cream, have some apple cider vinegar with that at that moment so you can support your gut health and reduce that stress. That's the number one thing I would say.
I love it. Thank you so much for this conversation. It's been a pleasure.
Yeah, thank you for having me.
Our guest today was Dr. Loredana Shapson. Visit her website, lifemodsolutions.com for more. And I am Hilda Labrada-Gore, the host and producer of this podcast for the Weston A. Price Foundation. You can find me at holistichilda.com. And for the transcript for this podcast episode, visit our website, westonaprice.org, and click on the podcast page. And now for a podcast review from Apple Podcasts from midwife Melissa. She titled it, Loving This Podcast. Wise Traditions enlightens with timeless health wisdom, blending traditional knowledge with modern insights. Each episode feels like a clarifying guide through the world of wellness, offering practical, life-enriching advice. It's a must-listen for anyone seeking a balanced, informed lifestyle. Melissa, thank you so much. These words mean a ton, and they just might do their part in bringing prospective listeners to our show. You too can leave us a podcast review on Apple Podcasts. Go to Apple Podcasts, click on ratings and reviews, give us as many stars as you like, and tell the world why they should listen. Thank you so much for listening, my friends. Stay well, and remember to keep your feet on the ground and your face to the sun.
On behalf of the Weston A. Price Foundation, thanks for listening. We have many free resources to support you on your health journey. Visit westonaprice.org to find podcasts, articles, videos, and more. You can also find a local chapter near you for help in finding sources of great food. We invite you to support the Foundation's mission of education, research, and activism by becoming a member. Thanks again, and take care. Wise Traditions is a project of the Weston A. Price Foundation for wise traditions in food, farming, and the healing arts. The content on this podcast is provided for informational purposes only and is not intended to substitute for the advice provided by your doctor or other healthcare professional. It is not intended to be, nor does it constitute healthcare or medical advice.